Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today, and it's an honor to bring back a friend of the program, a guy who's playing bingo with his calendar, keeping busy, playing really beautiful, melodic, introspective music. He was recently at the Jazz Standard with Gary Peacock and found some time to carve out set two. Marc Copland, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Nice to be here.
Let's just pick up where we left off. I asked you a question about mentoring, and I'd like you to pick up on where we left off and what you wanted to say.
Right. I think this had come up apropos. I had described my interaction with Sonny Stitt and how after I worked with him the first time as a sideman living in Washington, D.C., he had asked for somebody else, and the club owner, who was a friend, prevailed upon Stitt to give me one more shot. And I really did my homework. And he knew it, and he liked what I did, and he accepted it, and he called me a lot in the last 5-6 years of his life, and I enjoyed playing with him. So, you had brought up how do you, or maybe I had, but the subject had come up, okay, so how do you now, as an older player, get the younger players to, do what they need to do? And, this gets into a whole question of educational philosophy.
Absolutely.
And being as I'm 69 years old and a overgrown hippie, I read in high school, as did so many of my friends, the book Summerhill by A.S. Neal. And it's, for those that don't know, it's basically a description of Neal, who was an educator and a psychologist. Whether he actually had a degree or not, I don't know, but he sure understood the human mind. He had a private school in Britain where any kids could come. The parents paid rather handsomely, unless there were scholarships. And they were never asked to do anything. There were classes, they could go or not. And in Neal's experience, most kids stayed away from lessons for weeks, maybe a few months, and then eventually they'd get curious and bored, and they'd start coming around, and they'd end up learning whatever they wanted to learn quickly and easily, and were very happy, and didn't have any of the anxieties and stress and neuroses that children in regular schools seem to have. And Neal said, in so many words, he said, my greatest reward is seeing not that these kids have all become Albert Einsteins, but that they've all grown up to be happy. And they're doing what they want to do, and they love it, and they're very satisfied with that. Okay, so where music's concerned, I feel like players that play this music are doing it because we love it and because we want to. And if I have something I'm trying to communicate to a younger player, to me, if I feel like I've got to use words to say it, I'm not doing my job. And normally, even when it gets really tough, I will have I'll have a good think, and I'll ask myself, now, how can I play from the keys so that there's no doubt in this other younger musician's mind what he isn't doing and what he should be doing, without me having to say a thing. And normally I can find a way to do that. And I can give you a very easy example. if you're playing with somebody, could be a drummer, could be anybody, but if you're playing with somebody who's playing too much or playing too loud, so I start playing less and playing softer. And, that'll get a response pretty quickly because they'll start wondering, whoa, where'd he go?
Right. Especially, well, assuming he has some dynamic understanding of dynamics,
Well, or assuming he's listening at all.
That's right.
Yeah, if the cat or the lady is not listening at all, okay, then you got a problem.
Well, I mean, you're probably not on the bandstand with them to begin with. But I mean, in the
Exactly.
teaching component, though, like when you're just doing student teaching, not in a live performance, it's not the. This is what we ended with when last time was it's nonverbal communication. So continue.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is now when I do master classes, Jake. It's a different thing. I have a lot of things I talk about, and the best example or analog I can give to what I do when I talk about music to students in universities and conservatories all over the world is the way Richard Feynman used to teach, and anybody who's interested in investigating that can read this book, which is a delightful book called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. And this is a guy who won the Nobel Prize in physics. He's the guy who figured out why the shuttle crashed and showed the world on a televised hearing the problem is with the seal just by dropping it in a glass of ice water.
You're talking about the 1986 crash?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
The O-ring froze. And he dropped the O-ring in a glass of water and took it out, and it was no longer flexible. He said that's why there was the gas leak. That's why the thing blew up. It's a great demonstration, Very interesting guy. He loved what he did. He loved kids. He loved the human mind. And he had a way of explaining stuff, at least according to him in his book, which was just delightful. And that's kind of the way I've always approached it. It's a little different than playing, because when you're teaching, you are using words to communicate concepts, and that's okay. But playing's a different story. With playing, I think you have to use music and notes and feeling to demonstrate those concepts. And it's another language, maybe to get to a similar place, but it's another language. And when you're on the bandstand, I think the language of playing is appropriate. When you're in a classroom, I think the language of words is appropriate, unless, of course, you're playing to demonstrate.
I just wondered, I guess maybe the better question was not that Stitt had any kind of elitist bias, but he, clearly was like, I'm not, he told the club owner, I don't want Copland. And, or he wanted, and then the owner, you guys are friends, and he goes, just woodshed and get ready for this. And you worked your tail off, and it turned into a beautiful collaboration, and a lot of beautiful melodic improvisation came from it. And I just wonder, in your own, as a leader, or just as have you gone through an experience where you were Sonny Stitt and somebody else, you were skeptical of them, and then they eventually came in and you guys joined and had many conversations to come?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'd have to give that one some thought.
Okay, well, let me. You can think about it.
Okay.
Because you guys you and Gary just played the jazz standard. It was kind of funny because I came into New York to work on this documentary for Stan Getz, and I talked to Pat Martino, and he was playing right after you guys with his quintet, and I said, oh my God, you were actually at the Standard like the day I flew into New York. And I got to tell you, I went to the Standard, and setting aside that you guys got to sing for your supper and part of being there that night, I mean, I was exhausted. It was a tiring weekend, a lot of going on, but I was amazed. Not amazed. I'm not shocked by this, but I just feel that I don't know when jazz became, or when it became the club atmosphere. I mean, part of the music that you came up with Chico and with Tristano, so many of these cats that you learned from, were on the bandstand with. Just, it was a matter of walking out of you'd walk out as a patron with serious introspection. At least I would. I mean, it was about raising the collective consciousness of the audience and vice versa, that the audience would feed off the band and vice versa. And I want you to, I find that the settings for these concerts, jazz standard included, Midtown Manhattan, you have bevies and bevies of waiters and waitresses coming immediately to the table, taking your order, drink order, meal order. It's like so robotic. It's so formulaic, and pretty soon the set's over. And I just want you to ask about how you guys go about not just having a conversation, because that's the other issue, that why your generation is so important to this, is because you guys grew up with knowing how important the conversation was, and not just solo, another solo, end of tune, but really having a group conversation. So how do you raise the collective consciousness of the audience in today's world? Because jazz used to be a street music, and that's why so many of you guys wanted to be, it was a calling for you. And now it's become, I don't want to say boutique, but it was very bothersome to me. I just found the vibe wasn't there the way it should be. And I just want you to get your thoughts on that, because I realize that, you guys need to earn a living too, but it's not the environment where I just didn't feel the back and forth and the collective consciousness going on. In fact, I didn't really know, looking around at the patrons, not to paint with a broad brush, there were a lot of people there, a lot of students staring at Pat's technique. There were a lot of people there that didn't even know who he was, and I'm not sure if they were even paying attention. And so I just wanted to get your take. I mean, you guys had to bring a different vibe. I mean, we led in with this beautiful track by a duo of blue and green. It's called off, I guess, an album, Insight. You and Gary. So I mean, take all that and there's no question there. It's just go and riff on it. It's just my observations as a journalist and somebody who's wanting to. They kept badgering me about putting my camera away. Here I am trying to do a Facebook Live video to get this out to the world. I just don't know how people expect this music to truly grow and continue to thrive if you're going to be that uptight in those settings.
Okay. No, I think I can address this.
Good.
Now let me get clear. So you were at the Standard to hear Pat.
I came into Shadowbrook, spent 2 days up in Irvington, New York, and then on Saturday night, Pat got me 2 passes to the late show, 9:30 show on Saturday at the Standard, which was 2 days after you and Peacock were there.
Gotcha. Yeah, we were gone because we were up in we were actually on the way back from Boston at that point, about to go to Argentina. Okay. Well, I have a proposal to you.
Okay.
Which is, next time we're playing somewhere and we're both in the same town, let me know. Come on down, and I think what you'll find is what I try and do, and that usually means the people I play with have the same idea, right? Gary, Joey Barron, Drew Grass, the late John Abercrombie, so forth and so on. Where my pals and I come from is, and you nailed it earlier, we're trying to get in there and communicate with our collective consciousness and raise the audience's collective consciousness. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. And the way we do that with the space we put in the music and the way we listen to each other, the vibe in most places we play, I would like to say all, but I suppose I can't, but I would say 98% of the places we play ends up working for us, and even to the point where, like, you know, the waitresses and waiters, they're not dumb. They're the best listeners in the world because they hear that stuff every night.
That's right.
Right?
That's
300
right.
some days
That's
a
right.
year.
That's right.
And when there's something going on like what we're doing, they know. They get quieter. They're careful about when they start the espresso machine. They're careful about when they go to the table. And, you know, we don't go to them and say, you have to do this.
I did. No,
that.
I know. I did.
know.
Yeah, no, because this is important also for the audience that's listening worldwide. Pat is in this bag where he's been in this bag for a long time. Believe me, I mean, he's one of my teachers. He's one of my mentors, but he's been doing organ jazz stuff, and now he added horns. But I almost feel like it's just, and it's very technically good. But you guys bring, there's no mood per se to that music. I mean, you could pull out a Prestige record, you know, from the '60s, and it sounds like what Pat was doing at that time. So he's been in that bag for a while. You guys are actually doing very moody, very spatial music. So it's different. It's completely different because, like with Pat, with the organ and the bass pedals and the drums, the espresso machine is not really. No one's going to be bothered by that. But
well,
yours,
you'd never hear it. But now
yeah.
look, let's be clear. Pat's a bad boy. I mean, if John Abercrombie were alive to tell us, he would say, "I love Pat Martino."
Dude, he's and now that Pat is the baddest cat in the world. I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
And I'm just saying it was just, and believe me, it's just the organ stuff. There was just something, and I wasn't even in the best frame of mind, but I was just being badgered. I'm like, you know, as a journalist, I'm like I just want to have a ball. I want it to be kind of a party, you know. I mean, it should have because I'm getting giddy with this stuff. I want to dance to it. I want to tap my foot to it.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
It's different with different bands. I mean, you know, I love organ trios, and I love music when it's boisterous. It's wonderful,
right.
You know, and I've played my share of that in my time. And when you have that happening, as we said, you know, you can have a coffee machine going off. You can have this. You can have that. It's a different vibe. The vibe we try and bring to these places, and the room, including the staff, adapt to it no problem without us saying anything, is one of let's all plug in. The musicians plug into each other. The musicians plug in with the audience and vice versa. And let's create some colors and some space and some feelings, and let's see where it takes us. And I'm not trying to sound too, you know, hippy dippy trippy, but I think that really does happen, and it's not a better vibe or a worse vibe. It's just a different kind of vibe. And for us, you know, where we play is no problem because most of the time people absolutely adapt to that. I mean, I remember I came down years ago one night to hear Gary and Jufrey and Paul Bley at Sweet Basil's. And, you know, Blay and I knew each other, and he came off the stand, and I said, "Nice set." He said, "Well, yeah, this was good." He said, "Yeah, but boy, the first set is rough. They were loud." I said, "Well, you know what to do when that happens, right?" And Gary laughed and said, "Yeah, play softer." And I said, "Absolutely right. You know, you don't get in a war with them.
Right.
You bring it down to where they go, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here?"
Which is similar to what you talked about as far as the lesson on the bandstand. Interestingly enough, with the audience, with somebody who's playing too loud, you play soft, and that's so. Go ahead. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just you try and reach people, you know, and there are different ways of reaching people, and one is how can I say this? One is, you know, to bang them over the head and say, hey, pay attention. And another one is to say, hey, you know, stretch out your arms and stretch out your ears and let's try and get into this together. And, you know, they can both work. But for me and guys like me, we prefer the stretch out your arms invitation kind of way. And the same thing applies when I'm playing with the younger players. I try and make it so plain, so clear with my playing that they can't miss it. And I figure if I'm doing my job, then the music will work. Understand, part of my job, particularly if I'm a band leader or going out as a single, playing in another city with players I don't normally play with, right? Or
Right.
maybe have never seen. It's for me, it's a question of, am I going to say, you guys have to, my way or the highway, which is not going to get you very far, in my opinion. Or is it my job to open my heart and open my ears, take my own music that I want to play, but also feel and listen how these guys feel the music, how these guys feel their instruments, and show them by the way I play, here's a way we can work together to make something beautiful. And if sometimes it's a little more difficult to make that happen than others for whatever reason, it's not always easy. But if I'm really paying attention and I'm really doing my job, I'll find a way to do that. And I really believe that. And if you asked me, Jake, if you said, come on, there must have been one time you played with somebody so, clueless and so whatever that they just didn't pay attention, you couldn't get through. I have to say maybe, but not in 15 or 20 years.
Right.
Not since I really got comfortable with what I'm doing musically and on my instrument. And if you play who you really are, people will respect that and go with it. And most of the time, you're playing with somebody that wants to play with you to begin with. At my age now, 69, somebody's coming to play with me. They've heard of me. They've heard my stuff. They know who I am. They know what I do. So why would they be there unless they were interested? So that makes it even easier.
I want to read you this quote and then have you riff on it as it relates to how you and Gary work, because as really a non-musician, I find this stuff revelatory. You talked about colors before, and there's this thing called synesthesia, where you have these different sensory reactions. You hear stuff when you hear certain things, you see colors. But this is something that Narda Michael Walden talked to me about John McLaughlin. I want you to talk about it. He said,
okay.
He said, you're asking about a soul thing that happens. He's talking about me. He's like, when you play a piece of music and you listen to your heart, you listen to your soul, then magic comes into it. That magic is what we call breaking out. That magic takes on a whole new life and a whole new feeling. That's just the love you put into the music. You can't really describe it, and you can't really teach it either. The only thing you can teach are shapes in music. And this is the shapes in music. John McLaughlin would teach me shapes, how to play 5, how to play 7, how to play 9, 11, or 13, or 17 by the shape of it. Can you explain about creating shapes in music?
Well, I think he's talking about the same thing I am, but he's using shapes in a way that I use the word space.
So this is just so great because it ties into the mathematics of it and also the sensory input. It's not just auditory. So space or shapes, just take it from there.
Yeah. Well, what you're trying to do ultimately, I think, when you play music is, well, first of all, you have to be conversant with your craft, with your instrument, with the vocabulary, right? Because if you don't know the language, you can't speak.
Right.
And the better you know the language, the better you can express yourself. And the more developed and the wider your vocabulary, the more you can say. So you have to have all that. Having that under your belt, I think what all of us are trying to do ultimately is get to a place that transcends the music. And that's why I loved when you said you're trying to raise your consciousness and raise the consciousness of the audience. We've all had that experience, right?
Absolutely,
where you go
man.
and
Absolutely.
you go and hear something, and it's just you leave, and it's like you're walking on air. Something magical happens.
Or to be real, I mean, you go and you're deeply in thought about, you're pondering stuff. It doesn't, not always a happy thing, but the music makes you think. It's introspection. Everybody had to take Psychology 101 when you were going to college. Nobody has to do that anymore. So it's about understanding the human. Anyway, it's not always just bliss. It can be another way of. It can be mood. It's just mood. It's mood.
Well, yeah, I would say you're right. It's not always about bliss, but when I say walking on air, what I mean is you leave the club or the concert hall or whatever it is with a sense that you've discovered something.
That's right.
And something has changed a little bit in your life for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a bliss thing. It could be what you're talking about, an introspective thing. But the best art of any kind does that. And we've all had those experiences, and ultimately, I think that's what we're all trying to do. And we're going for a place beyond the notes. At least I know I am, and the people I play with are. I mean, we don't always get there, but the more we do it, the better we get at it. And getting beyond the notes and getting to something that really moves people, including ourselves as musicians, in a meaningful way, is kind of what this is all about. And musicians know it. I mean, when we get off the stand and we've had a really good night, we're just like in another zone. And it's the greatest feeling in the world. And it's, as you say, it's not all la-di-da happy smiles. It can be deep and introspective. It can be anything. But that's the payoff. And I think that's the payoff in life and in love and everything else. But since I'm a musician, I try and bring it to the music, and I get a piece of that from, not just from playing, sometimes from teaching. One of the nicest things anybody ever said to me was in Canada. I was given a master class, and one of the things I do when I teach is I have however many people were there, 50, 60 people. Some were musicians, some were listeners. I had them all singing an 8-bar phrase or a 16-bar phrase of a certain solo, with not my solo, with the recording. And then I made a point about what was so unusual that the musician was doing. And they all got it. And then I went on from there into my spiel about, what is the purpose of, quote, rules, unquote, and what are people doing when they break rules? Well, they're trying to expand the colors in their musical palette. And at the end of the class, this big tall kid, he comes up to me and he says, I really appreciate what you were talking about, and he mentions a couple things, and then he looks me right in the eye and he says, I think this afternoon this talk really changed my life, and I really appreciate it. And I just melted. It made me feel great, because when you reach somebody like that, then you feel like you've done a good day's work. And it's the same thing on the bandstand, except you do get people from the audience that'll come up and say stuff in that vein, although maybe not quite so direct and heartfelt, but sometimes. But you can feel it from the way an audience reacts, if you've gotten to them that way, if the music's gotten to them that way. And that's it's very humbling and it's very gratifying. It just, as a person and a musician, makes me feel like I helped somebody, and that's a nice feeling.
You're very poetic there. You said going beyond the notes. That's the goal. Is transcending the music itself, and so for not advice is the wrong word, but once you get the vocabulary and you understand, you are very rude. You have the rudiments. Okay, you have a deep understanding of the notes and the scales, and that to go beyond. At that point, isn't it really about trust and respect of the people that you're working with? I'm just trying to get to that point of people who, younger people, or it could be in their, who knows, younger than you though, you're a different generation where they demonstrate tremendous competence with their apparatus, and they get off the bandstand and they might feel good, but they haven't gone beyond the notes. There's
sorry to jump in. Listen, there's young people that haven't, but boy, there's young people that have gone beyond the notes, and I can't tell you how or why, but I can feel it.
You can feel it. Okay, so it's a feel. I'm just saying how in putting a group together for younger people who are like for that guy that was inspired by your talk. What are the nuanced, not almost unexplainable things that take the music from just the progressions and the notes to beyond the music? In your mind, what are those sort of intangible qualities that have to happen within the group?
Well, boy, if I could quantify that and put it in a grocery list.
I know. Yeah, I mean, you might not be rich, but you'd have a lot of books out there. But
That's right.
But I'm saying, like with you and Peacock, like you have trust, you have love, you have a long-standing working relationship. But back when you first started, or how do you get beyond the notes in your mind for people that, because like you're right, there are younger cats that do it because you can feel it. And I'm just trying to bridge that gap and that intangible stuff.
Well, I mean, two of the things that I think are necessary are to be constantly learning. The interesting thing that you just said was once you have your vocabulary, or once you have your basic vocabulary, and in a very real sense, and I say this in all honesty, I've never got my vocabulary where I want it. Mm-hmm. I'm always trying to. There's other stuff I'm hearing. I mean, Bartok said it. Charlie Parker said it. Coltrane said it. Everybody's always trying to, who's really dedicated to the music is trying to figure out and play new things that they're hearing and imagining. And it's a long process. It's not easy. It's very different from just copying a style from something that's recorded. And, if it's not a question of once you have your vocabulary, it's like once you've made up your mind that your life is going to be that of an artist and it's going to be dedicated to searching for an expansion of your mode of expression that continually enables you to express better and more deeply the things you want to express. And it's a never-ending search. It never stops. I remember when Bartok was it's a famous quote when he was on his deathbed, and they told him, your number's up, and he said, "It's such a shame because I have so much more music in my head than I'm hearing." This is Bela Bartok.
My gosh.
Unbelievable.
That's insane.
So imagine if he'd lived another 5 or 10 years. Well, he didn't. I'm still here, and it's my job, and it's my pleasure, and my the love for the music that keeps me searching like that and trying to get it out. And that's one thing you have to have. I think a second thing you have to have is, and now I'm going from I don't want to say the sacred to the profane, but you'll see what I mean. you got to be like the 1969 Knicks or the current Golden State Warriors. You got to be willing.
I love it.
You got to be willing to share the ball.
Share the ball, man.
And if you're willing to share the ball, give everybody you're playing with a chance, and if they have the same attitude, there's a very famous quote from Bill Bradley in one of his books. He says, it's not about one guy or how many points you're going to score. It's about 5 guys and just getting the best shot. He said, once you have 5 guys that understand that, anything is possible. And that's the way I feel about the bandstand. That's the way it usually is for me, playing with the people that I like to play with. Certainly the late Abercrombie, certainly Peacock, Joey Barron, Drew Gress, Ralph Alessi, onward and onward. And when you have 3, 4, 5 guys that understand that, or ladies, anything can happen. And anything likely will, and that's the beauty of it. It'll go somewhere off that maybe you don't see, and when you get there, you go, wow, this is really pretty cool. So you need both of those. So one thing, for example, is, and nobody likes to talk about it, I see it a lot, you get some musicians that, their ego just isn't really in the right place, and it just kills a lot of the music, and it's a shame. And this includes some very, very talented people. But to my ears, you got to be willing to let that go. And, there's a bunch of other things you have to be aware of. But it's the interesting thing. Peacock's been a Zen Buddhist a lot of his life. And when we first met, which was, I think, in '83, we hit it off musically.
Mm-hmm.
And about 6 months or a year later, he says, listen, I'm coming to New York. I want to set up shop back in New York. Can I stay with you for the first few months? I said, of course. So, he came, and we'd be playing, we'd go out to eat. And, here he is talking from a Buddhist perspective as well as a musician perspective about life and aesthetics, and I'm talking about life and aesthetics from a liberal arts humanist musician perspective, and we're saying pretty much exactly the same thing. It's about sharing. It's about not trying to take everything over. It's about having the goal of the greater good and letting everybody participate, and all that stuff that sounds maybe a little too California, a little too cosmic, but it really does work.
No. This is exactly the conundrum facing melodic improvisation in the 21st century. You're nailing it. It's not cosmic at all. It is completely about having a conversation and letting everybody on the bandstand have their say within each individual tune. I also, this is fascinating. I mean, is there a way for you to talk about, is it purely through feel if you're listening that somebody's ego is trampling the music? I mean, is it somebody, do they cut off other people? Do they, how do you know, or how should people be aware of, maybe they're in a band and they're making dough, but they're miserable, and they're trying to figure out why they're miserable, and they realize that it's because the leader or somebody ego's in the wrong place. How do you feel that as a musician?
Well, it's it comes in a million different forms,
mm-hmm.
but I can tell you as a fairly experienced listener and as a musician, I mean, I usually know it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad when I feel that, because there's unfulfilled potential up there on the bandstand, because there's almost always there's a pretty good amount of talent on that bandstand.
That's right.
And it's just a question of, is everybody plugged in? Does everybody have, is there anybody with an agenda, or is everybody just trying to really, really make music? And I can't really point to specifics, although goodness knows, on a particular night and a particular venue, if you and I were walking out together and we just heard the XYZ band and you turned to me and you said, what did I think? And if it was that type of band, I could say it's not really working, and I could point to here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be something as obvious as somebody cutting somebody off, but that's so blatant. You don't see that too much.
Yeah,
anymore.
no, I'm really trying to get at this idea of like you said, it's almost immediate, and I'm just trying to figure out that immediacy. Like, what does that feel? What that you immediately know that I'm going to have to stay within my own lane and do my thing and be at peace and do what I normally do. But this right away, it's something's askew. You just
it's hard. It's hard to verbalize, just like it's hard if we were going to say, "Wow, that was a really magical set."
Right.
What was the tip off?
I might be able to do that better than most as a journalist, but I'm with you 100%. I mean, as far as the emotive feeling, I just think it's really fascinating to identify. I forget who told me, I transcribed it, but I think Jan Hammer said it. It was just like one of these things where it just became this thing where all of a sudden melodic improvisation, music like that, it was all of a sudden you sat down and stared at someone's facility, as opposed to truly elevating your consciousness because of the conversation that was happening on the bandstand. And I just wonder if about that conversation is key. I mean, Steve Kuhn told me about it when he was working with La Rocca in the trio, and you talk about it, and it's like, this is, and then the other part of it is, this is the other part of it with you and Peacock is, like with Pat, he's got Carmen and Tori's an amazing drummer, Pat Bianchi's a great B3 player, they're younger cats, and they're playing great solos, but yet I can really just feel that it's not, so there's a conversation going on, but they've been doing it for so long that it's not fresh. So how do you keep that conversation fresh, especially if you might be able to have a repertoire at the Jazz Standard, or you go to Argentina for several nights and you can play all different tunes, but how do you keep the conversation fresh? Because it seemed like it was a conversation, not that they were having a bad time on stage per se, but as someone who's taken in that music several times, it felt like sitting around the table with my wife having the same conversation every night about our kids and our day. You know what I'm saying? It was not something that was inspiring. So how do you keep it from getting stale? I mean, in your iterations of different bands.
Yeah, well, that's in a way it's a challenge always, and in a way it's pretty much always gets back to the same answer, which is just let go and let it happen. It's when I get up on the bandstand, particularly with Gary and Joey, but in almost any circumstance, we're never sure who's going to start which tune.
I love it.
We're never sure exactly where the tune's going to go. We don't have, quote, arrangements, unquote, as such. The introductions can get kind of involved. The tags, can sometimes go on for quite a while, or they may not. All that's open. There's no, okay, and after they had 8 bars and we take it out. None of that. It's like whenever everybody feels it's right. And particularly when it's my own project, and my musician friends are all too well aware. It's like Joe Namath, play at the line. We go up on the bandstand. And I'll just start playing.
I love it.
And
yeah, right.
I have the decency to play something that I know they know, or that's sort of in the realm of what we've been working on, but maybe not, because in the end, I'm going to play whatever I'm hearing, and if it's not something that we went over, I'm just going to if it's somebody I don't know well, maybe I'll whisper, do you know this, But in general, I'll just do it, and, 95% of the time it works out. And, again, I'm fortunate, guys like I mean, Drew Gress is now, he just had a birthday. I think he's 52, I'm going to guess. I started playing with him when he was 19. So he knows me for a long time. And poor Drew, when he was younger, I'd start playing, Green Dolphin Street with a weird ostinato in the left hand. And, he had no warning. He had nothing. He just had to grab onto it right away somehow. And he was a good sport about it. And, of course, being the great player he is now, he's totally up for jumping on whatever. So if you have good musicians and they're willing to be flexible, that's how you keep the conversation from getting stale. And
the other thing is this, because I think we're actually getting to some of these answers here as it relates to ego, is that you don't necessarily have a de facto leader. I mean, there's no quote-unquote leader in the band because everybody in the band is brought into, the best leaders, I should say, they bring in people to do what they do best. And they allow them to do what they are gifted at. So you might start something with a weird ostinato, but you know that these guys are gifted enough. They're natural gifts. You're playing into their natural gifts for them to coalesce and start a conversation. And I think some of the ego component is when you bring people around to form a band and you never allow them to be themselves.
Yeah, it's for my attitude is anybody can start anything at any time.
Right.
And as long as everybody's listening and got their feelers out,
right.
Nobody wants to be a bull in a china shop. As long as everybody's got their feelers out, it can work out great. And I just a couple months back, we got a new trio project in the can with Joey Barron and Drew Gress. And, we're sitting in the studio, and Joey starts playing something in 6/8. He's not asking, he's just playing. And the engineers know, I tell them all, I say, just start the machine and don't turn it off.
I love it.
Because I never know when something good is going to happen. So Joey starts playing in 6/8, and don't ask me why, because I've never played the tune, ever. But I start playing Afro Blue in the wrong key,
yep.
And, Drew kind of climbs on it, but, we're doing it with a totally different vibe than the tune was done. And it worked out really nice. And we haven't mixed and mastered yet, so I'm not 100%
I can't wait to hear
sure.
that. I cannot wait to hear. But you stuck
I'm
with
pretty sure
it. You
it's going to
didn't
go on the record.
I think that's the other thing is the willingness at like a basketball team when the shots aren't always falling right away is to stay with it. Don't get.
Well,
Drew climbed on, and you grooved. And
well, number one, number two, it's like, if there were a big record company producer at the session, and he'd said, I want you to record Afro Blue, I would have rolled my eyes and blah, blah, blah. It's totally different. This is Joey starts a beat, and I'm like, oh, let me try that. It's just the first thing that popped into my head. And it was really fun. It's got a totally different approach than the way Train did it, which was, of course, great. And like I say, I'm pretty sure it's going to go on the album. So, Joey knows he can do that. And I'm not going to mind. On the contrary, I was kind of grateful. So right away we started off from a totally different, vibe. And
you should be no matter whether that gets on the album or not. That raw cut should be part of your class, so you can demonstrate that. I'm thinking more the Afro Blue, the Mongo version. But that to me is your rudiments are there, and then it turns into, okay, we're not in the right key for what Afro Blue is supposed to be in, but let's see what we can do with it. And then
you're talking trio instead of Mongo's band or Train's band, and it's a whole different vibe. But it felt good. That's
right. It felt good. It felt good. That's the thing, and that's the thing. Have you, David Spinoza, when he played on Right Place, Wrong Time for Dr. John's album. Arif Mardin and Dr. John brought him in the studio to lay that guitar solo down. And he laid out a clam in his own words. It was a major botched. He hit a wrong note. And he's like, I got to do that again. And they said, no, it felt right. That's perfect. And that's the solo that went on the record. Okay. So I want you to talk about this idea of perfection. You came to me in a very honest fashion saying I didn't like the way I articulated the mentoring question. So obviously, we went back and did it again. But in general, on the stand, the idea that is it more important for it to feel good as opposed to being perfect? Meaning, can you live with a wrong note? Because there are no wrong notes.
Well, there aren't and there are. But I would put it like this, Jake, that
Yep.
you gotta trust yourself to let go and to give yourself the freedom to make a mistake. And if you make one, then you got to give yourself the time and the space to look back on it, maybe while you're still playing or maybe, days afterwards listening to the track, to consider, well, does this sound okay or does it not sound okay? And, there will be some clams that don't sound okay, and there will be some that you would have sworn are wrong, and you go back and you listen to them and, wait a minute, that's cool.
Exactly.
And, mistakes are sometimes teaching moments. And I'm sure every pianist listening to this, and a lot more musicians than that, but in particular pianists, have, taken their hands and gone to plunk down a particular voicing, and oops, they hit a note or two that they weren't counting on, and they go, wait a minute, that sounds cool. What is that? And
It's a gateway. It's a gateway.
Yeah. They look down and they say, oh, look at that. That's kind of cool. And, I used to play with a drummer named Mike Smith, who's unfortunately no longer around. Wonderful drummer in Washington, D.C. Used to play with Steve Kuhn, actually. Made a couple albums.
Really? I don't know that name.
And,
That's interesting.
yeah, he was a wonderful drummer. And Mike had this wonderful habit. He was a short little guy, and he would just sit behind the piano with his beard and wire rim glasses and look up at the sky with this big grin on his face and plunk down a chord and laugh because he didn't have any idea what he was doing. He was a great drummer, but he didn't know the first thing about piano. And the first couple of times he did this, we'd be laughing, and about the fourth or fifth chord he would hit, I'd stop laughing, and I'd run over and I'd say, wait a minute, what was that?
Really?
Oh, yeah, because sometimes by accident, anybody can come up with something. So, on the other hand, he might hit 4 or 10 or 40 garbage chords before that one. But they don't count. They don't matter. It's the one that works that's the sort of little magical moment. So
it's okay. There's so many different. I wanted to get you and only your perspective on this. It's really important as I continue to on this journey. Is like, so I had an opportunity to interview Miroslav Vitous a while ago, and he talked about the bass as a leading voice in the band. People point to Mingus, or not Mingus so much, but Stanley Clarke or Miroslav Vitous, and he told me, he goes, this, what I was doing was nothing new. This started back with Scotty LaFaro and Bill Evans, okay, this conversation. But I would like to ask you, considering that you have had a collaborative relationship with Mr. Gary Peacock for many decades now, where does Gary fit in in your mind, as far as with Scotty LaFaro? They came up, he was actually on, if I'm not mistaken, he was on the scene before Scotty LaFaro doing West Coast jazz. And I'm just saying, did Peacock where does Peacock fit into the not obviously as a solo instrument, but as a lead voice bass player? Where does he fit into the lexicon as far as Marc Copland is concerned?
Well, I mean, first of all, Gary loves Scotty. You know, he loved what he did. We recorded Glorious Step, you know, for ECM. It's either on the first album or the second album.
Yes.
And I actually did a version of Jade Visions on my new solo album.
Wow.
And so, but Gary and Scotty, you're talking about, you know, maybe the two of the three pioneers of unlocking the whole role of the bass back in the early '60s. And
who would be the other one? Swallow?
Swallow was one. You know, and listen, Miroslav, I have to disagree with him. He was doing something.
No, but you know what it is? We were talking about, he didn't really get comfortable in the States. He didn't start really cutting any. He was very open. I'll send you the interview. He just said, it was not me. It was Scotty LaFaro. But now that I think about it, Gary Peacock was there. They were peers. I mean, they were peers, man. And that's the most invigorating thing, is to find out, when did this lead bass, when did this conversation really begin? Because that's really the crux of it. And I just, it's important to talk about how Peacock unlocked what you just said there. I can't repeat exactly what you just said, but it just flowed out. It was a whole new language.
Yeah, well, Scotty and Gary both, you know, had the sense that the bass shouldn't be limited to walking 4 or 2 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were both, and Gary's case still is, you know, had a real vision. They were both really into the expanding what the instrument could do, and they were both very strong and are both very strong personalities, and you need all that to make it happen. And you know, it's, you know, I don't know what, you know, who was
it's a
where
hard
and
question.
Who did what.
No, I know.
But Gary was well aware of Scotty, loves him to death, and to me, they're just sort of, you could say, two sides of a coin in a way. And obviously, I never got to play with Scotty. You know, Kuhn did. I talked to him about it a couple times.
Dude, he played with Scotty. With Stan. Stan got so insecure, he fired the band because he thought the trio sounded better than Stan.
Yeah, well, he may have had something there. I don't know, but
to me, LaFaro's legacy went so far beyond the jazz idiom. We're talking about psychedelic rock bands and blues guys that learned the upright bass, and they were all obsessed with Scotty LaFaro. And I'm thinking to myself, well, Peacock was on the West Coast too, burn Lorenzo Almeida, Terry Gibbs, Steve Allen, Barney Kessel, Carmel Jones, but he goes on and on and on. So Peacock's got to be part of that. He's got to be part of the conversation. You know, I mean, it just somehow Scotty LaFaro's name maybe because he played with Bill. I don't know.
Well, so did Gary.
Exactly.
You know,
so I'm saying, where's, you know, I mean, and maybe that's Peacock's sort of his humble, the nature of his spirituality is, but somehow LaFaro's name continues to wind up in the maybe I don't know why, but I want to make sure Peacock gets his due because Miroslav said it. Miroslav will never take credit. He was obviously a pioneer of in Weather Report and doing other things too, but there were precursors to that. That's all I'm saying. You know, you think you know.
Well, there's, you know, nothing comes from nothing. You know,
right.
So everybody had something to look back on and draw from, and if you listen. If you listen to early enough recordings and the right recordings, you can hear both Gary and Scott LaFaro walking forward with the best of them. You know, so it's. But I think those two clearly changed or tried to change the role of the bass, and you know, the the thing I love about that personally, and that I got to really jump in on when Gary and I first played together in '83, was that I found it very liberating, because then I had something I could converse in and around with. And then when you get two guys doing that, and it's a trio, of course the drummer's going to go the same way.
Right.
So then you got three people, and now all of a sudden you have this kind of insane amount of interplay, and it's sharing the ball. It's more fun.
It's infectious, actually. It's totally infectious.
Yeah, it's fun, and I would surely be a musically and spiritually poorer individual without having had that experience. And those two bass players definitely laid the groundwork for something like that to happen. There's no question about it. So it's a wonderful thing, and I mean, I still remember, you mentioned Miroslav. I still, to this day, one of my favorite albums of all time is it was an album of Miroslav's originally entitled Infinite Search.
Mountains in the Clouds. Yeah,
Mountain in the
unbelievable.
Clouds reissue.
Oh, my God. Oh.
Great album.
Mind blower.
And it's remarkable to me that a fair number of students in the conservatories today, a fair number of them do know about that album, but a fair number don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see how you can play music without being aware of that album. And it was Miroslav's whole deal. It was his concept, his tunes, everything. And so if Miroslav had never played another note, that would have been a very strong statement right there, that album.
Before I let you go, we'll do part 3 in the new year, no doubt about it. What is, you're still on this eternal search, like you said, searching for new notes. What is a driving force for you at this point in terms of, I mean, you guys you're busy, you're flying all over the world, you're playing gigs. You openly admit you have a humanistic view, we started talking about that, psychologist, and you have that sort of aesthetic, but how are you looking to evolve still as a human being?
Well, I still want to wake up every morning and look out the window and wonder, can I discover something new today, with the music or with life? And as long as I have that feeling, I'll be happy. When that goes away, and I hope it never does, then maybe I won't be so happy. And again, the people and the lives and the works of art that have influenced me most have had that perspective. And it's this is the wonderful thing about, for example, John Abercrombie, who passed this year when he was 72, and Gary Peacock, still with us at 82. That's the approach that they brought and bring to the music every day. That's what makes playing with musicians like that so wonderful. They have the same spirit, and when that's happening, it doesn't matter how old they are. They're still on the quest.
This is the follow-up is for you, is the discovery. I think it's also important for younger people to understand, Marc Copland wakes up, can I discover something new today? Is some of the discovery latent, meaning that something like we're in November, but maybe you go back to June and saying, wow, I didn't realize that at the time, but that was something new I learned. it doesn't have to be in that day itself. It can be a retrospective as well, and more of a latent learning experience.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
today,
So then you'll never lose it. You'll never lose it then.
Yeah, but also today, maybe I'm laying the groundwork for 3 months from now or 6 months from now. So it's. I mean, I come back to that thing that Bartok said on his deathbed. It just kills me. I mean, for him to say he had so much music in his head, he still wanted to write down. And as tragic as it was that he died with all that music in his head, it's so life affirming that he was still working on it in his head. He hadn't stopped trying to evolve, and I think that I would hope that's what we all want, is to evolve and change and grow.
Well, with people like yourself and the people that you surround yourself with, I mean, you're doing a huge service to society. I go back to elevating the collective consciousness of the audience, and I really look forward in the near future to connecting with you. Are you just before I let you go? Are you have any gigs in December in New York at all? Or I'm going to be back there for a minute, but
not in New York. I have some, but they're all in Europe.
Yeah, well, that's where this music is consumed greatly. So, I mean, next time let's plan a time to get together, because I just want to go and be silent and introspective when I see you guys. There's no doubt that it'll be a profound experience, and I really appreciate you catching a hang, man. I had a ball today.
Me too, Jake. Thanks so much.
All right, Mark. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man.
Later on. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Set 2 in the books with Marc Copland, a tremendous piano player, always looking to continue the dialogue, the conversation. It's imperative for spiritual music to raise the collective consciousness of both the audience and the band itself. We'll be back later this week with Graham Lesh. Until then, peace.